Thank you, and I thank you, Maureen, for putting all this together, and thank all of you for coming. I always relish the opportunity to come back to Connecticut. As some of you know who've known me a while, I'm a devoted New Englander. I'm still homesick, even though I've been gone since 1992. Living in other parts of the country, it's never the same as coming back to New England. I really always love coming here. And I especially am interested in coming here now that you've been swinging through the kinds of drought experiences that we've been seeing in other parts of the country. So it's interesting to be able to share perspectives and talk about some of these issues with you. I have a presentation that I've put together that I've entitled Conservation and Efficiency, What Are the Benefits? But what are the challenges? And what I'd like to do is really reserve most of the time for this meeting for a question and answer session with you. I know you're in the middle of putting together a state water plan. I know that there's opportunities now to really explore some issues for Connecticut that might not have ever been on the table before. And so I'd be happy to provide whatever perspective might be useful to you in those discussions. But Maureen had asked that I put together a background presentation on a couple of issues that might be of benefit to the discussions today. So she asked me to first talk a little bit about who we are so that you have a frame of reference. Yes, I used to work for DEP, spent 18 years there. Then I went to work for a water utility at Regional Water. Then I went to work for a water utility in Los Angeles, a wholesaler, so I have both the wholesale and retail perspective. But really where a lot of the water efficiency work is happening is in the nonprofit sector. I spent 9 years in California running an organization called the California Urban Water Conservation Council, which was the first forerunner of what we now call the Alliance for Water Efficiency. It's a national nonprofit organization composed of around 400 organizations nationally, well, U.S. and Canada, so more than just U.S. And what we do is we unite not only water utilities and water supply providers, but academia, environmental community, business and industry, government planning agencies. It's a wide range of stakeholders that are all working together on what types of strategies for water efficiency make the most amount of sense and what statewide might be prescripted. So we specialize in providing a lot of technical assistance, and for the work that we've done both in technical assistance, in research, in advocacy for better policies and programs on a national level, as Maureen mentioned, we did win the U.S. Water Prize. So what we've essentially done is built a network around the country, and you can see here where our members are located. And we do have members in Connecticut. You know, we've been active over the years in working with them. And so, as I mentioned, we provide assistance and training functions. I do a lot of public speaking, but we also do workshops and webinars that we make available on a wide range of topics. And we're always available to answer questions, but we also build tools to help water utilities in particular, that's about 2/3 of our membership, to help water utilities in particular plan the right kinds of conservation programs that will make economic sense for the utility. And so we've developed models to do that, and I'm going to show you what they look like. We also provide special consulting services, and we're working on a couple of NRW non-revenue water projects around the U.S. at the moment. Most of our stuff is on the web. We built a website in 2007, which I know is ancient for website years, but we're in the process of revising it. But it's a very complex website with a lot of information that's available free of charge to anyone who visits us. Everything from drought information to program information, latest research, water and energy, lots of topic areas. We probably have several thousand documents posted on the website, lots of narrative information available. So we provide what we call a conservation clearinghouse. So that's just a little bit of background on who we are and what we do and why I'm here today. I'm here today in a technical assistance capacity to the Water Planning Council to be of whatever assistance I can to work, especially with Lori and helping her identify what some of the water efficiency strategies might be that might work in your state water plan. Specifically, though, in the presentation, I wanted to cover a couple of things. I want to talk about the benefits of water conservation and infrastructure planning. It's not a new message, it's an old message, but in this era of rate panic, it's an important message to continue to talk about. We want to talk about the long-term programs for conservation, which is different than the short-term drought measures that you might invoke in a drought stage, but then abandon or repeal later. And then we want to specifically talk about this thing called the conservation conundrum, which is, sure, we're reducing our water use, and that's a good thing. We're not wasting water, but now we're reducing our water sales, and what happens there? What happens there is revenue instability for the water utility. It's a problem that can be managed, but the question is how, and so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the program that we've developed to manage that called Financing Sustainable Water. And then I want to just conclude by talking about what other states are considering and doing in the way of water efficiency and conservation policies, and what Connecticut might learn from that. So that's kind of the agenda for today. But I wanted to start, which is where a lot of us in conservation start, which is let's look at where it's now not raining. You know, the U.S. Drought Monitor has been this wonderful resource over the years where you can get a snapshot of what the U.S. looks like in terms of drought. So here's a shot from December of 2010, and you can see drought's really starting to grip Texas and really starting to grip Florida. But you know, New England looks pretty white, so no drought there. Even California looks pretty white, right? They had a wet year that year. So most of the northern part of the country is in good shape. Fast forward to 2014, and oh, what a difference a couple of years makes. Look at California in the west now, heavily in drought. You know, above Texas now, and even in Oklahoma, they're suffering from drought. New England's still pretty good, but Rhode Island's got a little bit, you know. Tennessee, who would have thought Tennessee would have an issue? But, you know, it moves around. Then you get to 2015, and the map starts to look really different. Suddenly you've got a drought in the upper Midwest, you know, Minnesota and all of those states are now beginning to look at shortages there. California is in deep trouble. They're really, really in a serious, serious drought. And Florida's beginning to experience, you see it in the tip, and suddenly northern New England is starting to look a little dry. Okay, so then fast forward to 2016. Look at New England now. Oh my gosh, we haven't seen that in years. California's even starting to look better. Texas has had floods, so it's largely okay. But now look at Atlanta. So these things are changing patterns. Fast forward again to 2017. New England still in pretty tough shape. Connecticut looking real red. California's coming out of it. It's looking better. Texas is looking great. Atlanta's still a problem. Now we're in March. You're still in drought. California is almost white again. Texas is white. But now we're seeing drought again appearing in Florida. And you look at it today, and there's been lots of rain all over the country, but not in Florida. So what am I trying to show you with these maps? I'm trying to explain the concept of drought is not an if, it is a when. When drought is going to hit you, you have to be prepared, because it may not hit you in New England for 15 or 20 years, but when it does hit you, it is an instant hit. You don't have the same sort of reservoir storage capacity that these giant reservoirs have out west. So suddenly you're down to 50 days of storage left, and it's hit you out of nowhere. So these are the kinds of trends that we have to prepare for in the planning, not just for drought planning, but for the long-term conservation that will help modulate how much you have to do during that drought period. Because we're seeing these shortages becoming a way of life. The U.S. Government Accounting Office has done a study, 2003 was the first one, and this is the update, 2013, where they asked the states, when are you experiencing either local or regional or statewide shortages? And these are the states answering, yes, we're going to experience shortages within the next near-term 10-year period. Only Montana was the state that had the guts enough to declare that they would have a statewide shortage. You would think California and Utah and New Mexico and Arizona would all have declared statewide shortages. But no, Montana is the one state that came clean. But it's just about everybody. If you look at it, if you exempt out the states that didn't even answer the survey, which is, you know, some of those Midwestern states, 40 of the 50 states are going to be experiencing chronic shortages either on a local or a regional basis or a statewide basis in the short term. And 10 years is very, very short term when you're talking about infrastructure planning. And to make matters worse, we're growing in all the wrong ways across the country. This map shows, the colors show how much water you have. So the bluer your state, the more water you have compared to others. The more yellow your state, the more arid you are. And each state is a percentage block which shows how much the state is going to grow between the year 2000 and the year 2020. And you will see that all the states that have water are growing at infinitesimal single-digit percentages, whereas those states that are growing the largest are all states with arid water supplies, water shortage conditions, serious unavailability of future long-term supply. So we know we're exacerbating the problem going forward. And so these are all things to take into account when looking at national water efficiency issues. So let's get into the whole topic of conservation and infrastructure, because that's not often thought about. Mostly we think about conservation as a drought measure, something you ask the consumer to do on a behavioral response, and it's short term, and when the drought goes away, the response goes away. But it's more beneficial than that. Let's first look at what the difference is between water efficiency and conservation, because I think of it as different. People like the term efficiency because it sounds less onerous to the customer. It doesn't sound like you're rationing water. When you say water efficiency, you're just being efficient. So the concept of efficiency is having a product like a plumbing product or a clothes washer that is the most efficient product you can buy, and that you're also operating your distribution system in the most efficient way possible. These are efficient concepts, and it's long-term efficiency prospects. But conservation is what you do with that efficient fixture. You can have a shower head that flows at 2 gallons a minute, but if you're standing in it for 30 minutes, it's not very water conservation oriented, right? So the water conservation piece comes from the application of that technology to a particular use. And both aspects need to be dealt with in a water conservation program. And in many respects, the conservation part of it can be the bigger part of the savings. Outdoor water use is a classic example. Some of the commercial users, like commercial kitchens, are a great example of where behavior really increases the water use in a particular facility. So what are the reasons we want to reduce water, aside from the sort of ethic of reducing water waste? Why do we do it? Why do water utilities do it? Why did we start doing it even in Connecticut? And it's because water supply solutions are costly. They have environmental impacts. They take decades to develop. So if you're suddenly facing a shortage in the next 8 to 10 years, building a new storage reservoir is not going to be in your cards for a solution. You need something that is going to give you more immediate relief. And while water conservation can't provide you everything you might need for a future growth, it can provide you a lot, especially in the short term, and it can provide it very cost effectively, where the unit increment that you get from water conservation, the gallons you save in water conservation, will be far cheaper than the gallons you buy through an alternate supply source. So we think of conservation as a way to reduce your future short-term and long-term infrastructure costs. And in addition, it can help you modulate your demand. If you've got, for example, new growth patterns that you're seeing, you know you're going to need new supplies, you can satisfy that new growth from your conserved water that you take from one customer and then supply to another. If you've got a peaking problem, and increasingly I'm hearing that Connecticut utilities are suffering from real peak consumption in the summer. It's a problem we see out west. I never expected it would be a big one here in New England, but I'm hearing that it is a problem. Lots of summer irrigation. That creates a peak. If you have to always build your capacity to that peak that maybe you have to serve 13 days a year, then you're creating unnecessary infrastructure expenses to meet that peak. Water conservation can bring that peak down and reduce the need for additional investment. And then there's the issue of recovering leakage in your distribution system. That leaked water, rather than being leaked back into the ground, can be recovered and supplied to another customer at revenue that the utility can get. So these are all the utility benefits of conservation. But there are lots of environmental benefits for conservation too, because as you're reducing the amount you're withdrawing from rivers and streams and groundwater basins, you are leaving more behind for habitat purposes and for environmental flow purposes, and you're helping, keep wetlands solvent and active. You're protecting groundwater supplies from over-extraction. All of these are issues, particularly in states not like Connecticut, but states that have very little groundwater regulation, that really are pretty much Wild West oriented in terms of, I can drill a well and you can't stop me and you can't tell me, I even have to report to you. Yes, there are states like that. And then there's the whole issue of contaminants and TMDLs, and the laden runoff from irrigation laden with pesticides and fertilizers, all of that contributes to the TMDL and phosphorus loading problem. So these are all issues that water conservation can help with. We have to be able to afford them, of course. So I'm not here to say Every water utility should do everything that's possible because not all of it is cost effective. And we believe, as a matter of policy, that water efficiency and conservation programs should be scripted that are cost effective for the utility, that are based on what costs the utility is avoiding. If you're avoiding having to buy a gallon of water, treat a gallon of water, pump a gallon of water, all of those avoided costs are part of your benefit. And that's the analysis that has to happen. So we view water conservation as a cost-effective way to stabilize your consumer demand, make it a little more flat so that you don't have these wild peaks, and sort of stabilize the demand so that then you can match up and stabilize your revenue. And all of this helps to either avoid or delay future infrastructure. So we've got a little graph that shows you what that's about. So this is a graph that comes out of the AWWA M52 Water Conservation Manual. And it's a stylized graph. It's not showing any utility system, but the average principles are here. If your solid black line is your demand going into the future because you're expecting population growth and you're expecting growth in demand, but you're exercising conservation programs that reduce that demand to the dotted line, you'll see that a line called existing capacity, which used to run out on the baseline at 2020, now extends out to almost 2030. And if you do more conservation, you can extend it out even further. And that dotted line extension is usually worth millions of dollars, depending upon the utility and depending upon the calculations. Then when you have to add, whether it's treatment capacity for drinking water, or whether it's wastewater treatment capacity, or whether it's water supply capacity, all of those issues, once you reach that point where you do have to add, then you can downsize the infrastructure that you're adding, again, saving millions of dollars. And this principle is illustrated amply in the 90s by the city of New York that installed throughout Manhattan 1.6 gallon per flush toilets. I think they probably put in about 1 million of them. And they saved a $1 billion sewage treatment plant expansion as a result of putting in those toilets. So they spent $600,000 to, $6 million to save $1 billion. So it's a cost-effective investment. But you say, we're not adding new infrastructure. We are only replacing existing pipes. That's not something we can avoid with conservation. And this is a chart that's put together by the American Society of Civil Engineers, and it shows the regions of the country and their relative investment in existing pipe replacement versus new capacity expansion. So you see in the West and in the South, I'm having trouble reading it because I'm fairly blind, but the bottom two regions are roughly half and half. You know, half of the infrastructure expenditure is going to be for new expansion. New England is not so much. You have a lot of pipe that you have to replace, but there is that increment of expansion in New England that even in water and wastewater will be tied to new development and new expansion, and again, that's millions and millions of dollars. So here's a city, a wet city, that's more like New England than other parts of the country. This is Seattle. And this is what Seattle has tracked over the course of about a 30-year period. They started in 1975 looking at doing some conservation programs, and their population grew by about 400,000 people. But their total consumption went down. They reduced their non-revenue water, which is the area in white, but they kept their billed consumption relatively level. So this is an example of a utility that actually took those principles to heart and didn't build that extra capacity they might have needed, and they saved money in the long run. And they even track what they might have made the mistake of investing in the future. This is a pretty gutsy chart. Most utility planners wouldn't put this out on the internet the way Seattle did. But what each of those dotted lines shows you going off into the horizon there, those dotted lines are all what they thought the demand was going to be at that point in time. So in 1965, they really thought they were on a linear growth straight up. Then they started to modify it to be a little bit more level. But in any case, if they had built to any of those lines, they would have been way, way over capacity. Thankfully, they didn't do that, and they kept their consumption relatively stable, and then it started to go down as consumption has gone down everywhere in the country. And now because they didn't invest in all of those stranded assets, they ended up saving their ratepayers a lot of money. So how do you figure this all out? And one of the first things we did when we created the Alliance for Water Efficiency 10 years ago was we wanted to build a model that water utilities could use to figure out what that economic potential was of conservation, because that would be a motivating factor for a utility to do the conservation program. So we built something called the Water Conservation Tracking Tool, and it analyzes the water savings that could come from a given suite of conservation programs. The user can choose whatever it wishes, and then what the cost would be of that program, and then what the economic benefits would be of that program. We don't do the environmental benefits because there isn't usually a lot of economic information available, but there's a way in the model to add it if you have that information. Then the model ranks the conservation measures as to which you should do first, and based on cost. It tracks, you can track your implementation of it, which is why we call it the tracking tool. So it will assess for you what you're saving along the way as you do the programs. And it also shows you your energy savings, what you save in electricity, in gas, if you're using gas to heat hot water especially, or to pump, and then what your greenhouse gas emission savings are from any given suite of conservation programs. The model allows you to save scenarios, so you can do a conservation program that's very heavy duty, and then you can do one that's conservation light, and then you can compare what they look like. The model allows you to do all of that. But also, most importantly, and this is the first time I've ever seen a conservation model do this, we were really determined to add this to the model. It predicts the change in your revenue requirement. Because if you don't address that right away, it's going to come back and bite you later, and we'll talk about how it bites you later. So here's what it looks like. There's a screenshot of the tracking tool. It's built in Excel. It's real simple and clean to use. It basically is the principle of taking your utility demand data, that forecasting data I showed you in the other chart, combining it with what your avoided costs would be going into the future. At what year do you have to add capacity for treatment or for storage or for anything that's related to expansion, and what is that going to cost you? All that is important to calculating the economic benefit. And then there's conservation measures that we have scripted for you, but you can add your own, and you put it all together in the blender, and the model outputs are what I mentioned, the savings analysis, benefit cost ratios, the revenue impacts, and the energy impacts. So here's an example of how you add the conservation programs. It's all done through dialog boxes. It's easy to use. You can build tables in the background. And then it starts to show you what your changes look like. That top line is that baseline demand, unadjusted baseline demand. The second line, that red line, is what is automatically happening just from codes and standards. The utility is doing nothing. This is happening in the background. And we wanted to show utility managers that that demand that has been automatically being reduced behind your back is something you can track and that you can predict. And in some cases, in many systems, it's as much as 1% reduction per year of overall system consumption. That's huge. And if you've ignored that over the past 20 years since the Energy Policy Act was passed, you are caught short every year with short sales because you didn't factor this in. The third line in the chart is what the active conservation programs yield you. So that red line is going to be there whether you decide to do conservation or not. We wanted to make sure utility planners in particular are aware of the impact that codes and standards are having on their own utility consumption in the background. So the model tracks what your savings are. It distinguishes, the color distinguishing there is between what the standards would give them if the consumer just replaced it on its own. That's the red bar part of the bar. But if you're doing early replacement because you need additional savings from that fixture, and this is tracking high efficiency toilets, the blue part is what the utility is paying for, and we can aggregate and summarize the value of that blue bar area and what the cost is for that blue bar area. So then it gives you the benefit cost analysis. You know, you always want to be above 1, you know. Most conservation programs are 2, 3 to 1, and then it'll rank the conservation programs in the order of unit cost, and it'll also show you where NRW water loss correction factors into this. Because everybody thinks, well, leakage recovery is really expensive, but I'll just do stuff with the customers. But this shows you that leakage recovery, the red areas are leakage recovery. A small program is the one at the top. A more expensive program that's more comprehensive is the red bar on the bottom. And what that's saying is, in the whole suite of conservation measures for a customer, utility water loss recovery actually is more cost effective than a number of those other programs. You need to look at that right away and consider how that works in your system. And then here's the chart of the revenue impact. So what we've done with this chart in the model is we've given you for every year that your conservation program is proceeding what your revenue requirement needs to be for that year. So the first 4 years, you have to budget more. Your revenue requirement is going to go up because you have not only the reduced sales from the conservation program, but you're paying for it at the same time. Almost no utility anymore, unfortunately, is debt financing conservation. So they're paying for sometimes programs that have 15 years of benefit, they're paying for it in the first 2 to 3 years of the program when it's running. So that's like saying, okay, we're going to build a reservoir and we're going to pay for it all out of operating funds, and we're going to do it we're going to pay it all in the first 2 years, even though the reservoir has a 40-year life. Nobody does that. But that's what we're doing in conservation. That's part of this rate shock that everybody is feeling. But once you get to year 5, those blue bars you can see, they all go below 0, and suddenly it's benefit to the consumer, the ratepayer, because the rates can actually, the revenue requirement's going down. It's just a short-term impact. If we could debt finance, you'll see the green bars of the debt financing, you never end up having to increase your revenue requirement because the savings are being paid for over time, over the course of the program, and so your costs aren't immediately being felt. You've capitalized the cost into the program. So this is part of what we wanted to demonstrate to water utilities, that first of all, you can predict your rate shock. You can, before you even start your conservation program, you can begin to design rates that address this so that you're not catching the customer off guard, you're not catching your system managers off guard. But then think about more creative ways to finance it that also will reduce that short-term pain. So that's the infrastructure piece. And then there's the whole area of conservation programs for long-term demand reduction, and I think that's a whole nother talk that we might want to come and give at another time, but I just wanted to give you some thoughts about that. Because there are short-term actions that we usually associate with drought, and drought measures, you know, customer watering restrictions immediately come to mind. And then there are long-term actions that relate to, you know, retrofits of products and appliances with customers, you know, instituting long-term programs that help to modulate demand over a long period of time. The long-term conservation programs are usually much more expensive because they involve an investment, but they're permanent and they're reliable and they're predictable. Whereas the short-term is usually behavioral, and sometimes there's bounce back and it's unpredictable as to what your demand is going to be afterwards. What you really need to do is a combination of both. And the long-term is what's going to give you that resiliency and stability that's going to keep your system a little bit more steady. And that's what it's all about from a utility management standpoint. These wild swings of revenue that we're experiencing are not healthy for the system, and they certainly mask the good, positive effect that conservation will bring. So just to talk sort of high level, 10,000-foot level about conservation programs, I think they roughly fall into 4 basic areas. The first area is public education. It's where we all start. When I was at Regional Water and Dick McHugh came down and said, I got a new assignment for you, it's water conservation. I was doing government affairs and public affairs at the time. I said, I don't know anything about water conservation. And Dick says, well, nobody else here wants it, it's yours. You've got all those friends like, you know, Denise Rizika over there, the Department of Health Service, just do it. It can't be that hard, just go to a conference. So what we started doing, of course, was what every utility starts to do, which is consumer education, school education, programs that we feel comfortable doing because we've probably had them all along, but now we're going to focus a little bit more on conservation. We view those as not too terribly expensive things we can do, maybe do some outreach and demonstration projects, but fundamentally it's not a big budget expenditure. But then you get into the whole concept of good management, because you can't talk to the customer about the customer conserving if they see leaks unmanaged in your distribution system, you know, flowing down the street. So recovering non-revenue water is an important part of that. In doing regular distribution system audits, you know, improving your billing and metering practices, replacing those meters that are, you know, now getting to be 20 years old and probably not registering very accurately. All of these issues are part of the good management part. And then comes the laws and regulations. And we ended up, you know, in Connecticut with the 1989 legislation that required that all systems serving 10,000 or more in population had to do a conservation program that was approved by the Department of Public Health. And that sets that sets a bar. Suddenly everyone now has to comply with requirements. At the same time, we were doing standards for plumbing products that were now embedded in federal law. That creates a different environment where suddenly now conservation is mandated in a very direct kind of way. And then locally, local ordinances are adopted to reduce customer water waste. A popular one out west is called, a ban against gutter flooding, which means you can't irrigate so much that there's water running along the gutter into the storm drain. That is now illegal. So those are the kinds of strategies that then begin to emerge in a water conservation program. But the most successful pieces of it are the ones we come to later, and those are the ones that stick with us, that have the real long-term impact, and those are the economic incentives where you are actually, as a utility, paying for the investment of water efficiency in your customer, whether that customer is residential and getting, a free toilet, or whether it's a commercial customer getting a rebate on a new fancy, high-efficiency commercial dishwasher. Whatever it is, you are investing in the efficiency, the long-term efficiency of that customer. And we are finding that those programs are the most predictable and the most successful. And it also includes pricing changes that you make in your rate structures to discourage consumers from using profligate amounts of water because there's no penalty for it, financial penalty for it. So those are the kinds of things that are also developed in the area of economic incentives. So we feel that a conservation program usually has to have a little bit of all of that. So where do you start? You start by analyzing the water system that the conservation plan is intended to serve. No conservation plan can be cookie-cuttered. I get calls all the time from people who say, show me a good conservation plan that I can copy. Oh, no, 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 no. You never want to do that, because the system has to have its own goals for water conservation and what it needs to achieve within the economic limitations of what faces it. And lots is possible. It's going to be different for every system, but it has to be done individually. And you start by analyzing where your water is being consumed, where your high water using customers are, what your long-term goals are for system expansion. Do you have a peak problem or not? Is yours a long-term water supply availability problem? Are you over capacity? What are your issues? Is it just a drought response you're looking for? So you start by analyzing the system. You develop customer programs where you have identified where your water use is highest, where you get the biggest bang for the buck. You start with those. And then you design and adopt a conservation plan that can be immediately implemented, that doesn't take 10 years of study before you can actually get enough data to start. That would be not productive. Design programs where you can hit the ground running in various ways. And Amy Vickers has a great list of 10 steps to planning a conservation program that's in her book, Handbook of Water Use and Conservation. And it's a terrific set of steps. I thought about adding it here, and maybe that's, Lori, something I might do in a future presentation, but I refer you to it because it gives you a great list of what you need to do at what point. And so what does a good conservation plan have in it? So here's at least my list. It needs to address the whole issue of network leakage, distribution system, and recovery of non-revenue water in your distribution system. It has to be an important priority. I'm not saying you should ever invest more in recovering leaks than the economic value of that leakage, but there's plenty of room to do that, and most utilities aren't even close to approaching that. We need to price water correctly to our customers. That's becoming more and more tricky, which is why we've developed an initiative to address that I'll talk about. You need to audit your high water using homes and businesses, find out what they're actually using and help them with addressing that water waste, and maybe help them with retrofitting, help them replace out that high plumbing usage, help, replace appliances, replace processes in commercial businesses that are high water using and that can benefit by new technologies that are available. Reduce waste and landscape watering. This is becoming now this huge issue all over the country, and it's stupid. There are parts of the country where 80% of treated, safe drinking water in the residential sector is out on the lawn. It's an insanely incorrect way for us to be irrigating. And part of that is total waste, where the irrigation systems are set to go off at a certain time of the day. We never see it. It's 3 in the morning, and they're consistently over-irrigating that landscape. And it's now beginning to show up in customer bills if the water rate structure is incentivizing that as a signal. But for the most part, people are oblivious to it. They have absolutely no idea that they're using this amount of water in the landscape. People say to me, I conserve. I shut off the water when I brush my teeth. I mean, that's a couple of gallons, right? Thousands of gallons every time that irrigation system comes on. So these are the kinds of issues that we really need to address. I never thought it would become such a big issue in New England, but it is. It's these automatic irrigation systems that are going in everywhere for convenience purposes are increasing water use. And for many utility managers, they love it, right? They have rate structures that reward high water use, and they get the reward of it and a lot of revenue from that high tail block water use. But it's not sustainable over time, and it really is very wasteful. So that's got to be part of any conservation plan. Lots of industries now are looking at recycling in their operations. That's something that can be very cost beneficial to look at. Adopting local rules to manage customer water waste. We talked about those ordinances, gutter flooding ordinances. But increasing public understanding in general about what water they use. There are lots of surveys that utilities have run over the years, and they consistently come back with the same answer. The customer has absolutely no idea how much water they use. And this is in an era where, you know, we're all wearing Fitbits and we like all this feedback, but we don't get routine feedback on our water use, and so we tend not to even think about it. The East Bay Municipal Utility District in Oakland did a survey once, one of those Jay Leno sidewalk surveys, you know, guy walking around with a clipboard asking questions. And they asked customers walking around Oakland, how much does your household use in water every day? And the answer came back between 20 and 25 gallons a day for the whole household of 4. When told that the increment was something like 250 gallons per person per day, the customers said, and this was not just one, but many, oh, no, I don't use that much. Oh, no, we don't use that much water, but my neighbor does. And so this is the phenomenon we're in now. We don't think we use much water, but we'll turn in our neighbor if we think the neighbor is. And so the increasing public understanding is an important part of conservation planning, and involving, you know, enlightened customers and water users in decisions and program planning is also part of it. You can't just implement a program that no one has given you any feedback on. You've got to invest the community in that conservation plan. It's true. That's when it's most successful, you know. So, and then new development, they need to be developing in an efficient way, because you don't want to have to go in as a utility 10 years later and retrofit them because they didn't build smart from the start to begin with. So these are all issues that I think a good conservation plan can address. And so we help you with that at the Alliance for Water Efficiency. This is an example of one work product we've put together. We call it our Commercial Kitchens Guide. It's a guide for the restaurant manager. It's a guide that helps them identify what water efficiency opportunities are there in a commercial establishment, a restaurant, which is a very high user of water and just about everywhere, and gives them tips on how to reduce that water use, and shows how it's cost effective for them, even on savings on their water bill. So this is one of the documents that we make available to our membership. But I wanted to, in terms of this long-term conservation planning, I wanted to talk about the role of standards, because I think that's largely not well understood, and many utility managers have not realized the background effect that these standards that were passed in 1992 have had on their consumption. Because let's face it, nobody can afford to build new houses anymore. What do? They remodel their existing house. So everybody over the past 2 decades has been remodeling their bathrooms. And as they take out those old pink toilets and replace them with something slick and new and modern, they are reducing their water use something by half in most of these bathrooms. This is happening in the background, unbeknownst to many water utility managers. But we worked hard to get that to happen. I mean, we passed standards in Connecticut in 1989, thanks largely to Denise, who was a very enlightened person on the subject of toilets back in 1989. And the 1.6 gallon per flush toilet, which is a 6-liter toilet in Europe, was in wide use all over Europe. And there were certain states, Massachusetts and Connecticut were among the first, to require that those be the toilets that would be sold in point of sale and installed in new construction in Connecticut. Eventually, 13 states in total developed their own standards, and that gave us enough groundswell with the manufacturers to develop a national standard. So a national standard was adopted in 1992, went into effect January 1st of 94. It said that all plumbing fixtures had to meet very efficient flow rate and flush volume standards. That's the background of how that's resulted in all this free savings for water utilities. Then we launched the WaterSense program, which then further required another 20% reduction beyond that legal minimum. And there are hundreds of utility programs all across the country that retrofit to that WaterSense standard. So it's a really important program. And what we're worried about at the Alliance for Water Efficiency is, can we hold on to these standards in this new environment? The plumbing efficiency standards that we argued so hard for in 1991 and 92 are now potentially facing challenge. So something that it's been, 25 years, 26 years, a long time ago. It's now back on the chopping block. And unfortunately, it's ignoring the subject of how much we save from those standards. We decided at the Alliance during one of the World Water Day events, we decided we would try to compute just toilets alone, how much water savings came from just toilets under the Energy Policy Act. And we didn't even take into account utility rebate programs. We just assumed a normal background change-out rate of 4%, which is really very consistently steady in the industry. And we assumed that those savings were cumulative value of those savings. It turned out to be 18.2 trillion gallons of water, which coincidentally is the exact same amount that New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago uses in that same 20-year period. So we're not talking about a small amount of water here. This is a huge amount of water that's been saved just from standards that now industry is strongly in support of, and certainly utilities have been benefiting by. But as I say, they're now at risk. The studies are documenting reductions in per capita consumption in households. In 1999, when the Water Research Foundation originally started looking at residential end uses, the average residential household was using 62 gallons per person per day indoors. It went down to, in 2015, went down to 58, but in the WaterSense homes, it's down now to 36. So we know these standards work, and we know that they're predictable, and we can actually calculate the effect of these standards on water consumption for the utility. And we're really proud of the WaterSense program. Here's a group of us all standing with the EPA administrator to announce the water labeling program called WaterSense. If you're familiar with Energy Star, this is the water equivalent to Energy Star. And it was launched in 2007. It's been around for about 10 years. It's a voluntary program. It's not regulatory, but it's had huge uptake in the market. The latest statistic I heard was something like 73% of all plumbing fixtures sold now in the United States are WaterSense labeled. I mean, the industry has really embraced it and is really working hard to get those products out, which result in savings for utilities. Look at all the savings, gallons of water, billions of dollars in water and energy bills, 146 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, 54 million metric tons of CO2. These are all impressive statistics from a voluntary program, but that voluntary program is being cut. It is slated in the president's budget, and it was confirmed with the budget that was released on Tuesday, zero funding. It will be eliminated October 1st if we don't fight to keep it alive. And the standards may also be under attack because it's part of the whole regulatory reform agenda. So we're working really hard to save the WaterSense program. We've developed this little coalition to fight to keep WaterSense funding authorized by Congress. We're spending a lot of time. We sent a letter to Administrator Pruitt with 187 organizations signed on, asking him to keep the WaterSense program. We'd love to have more of you on that letter. What we're planning to do, even though we've sent it once, we're going to keep collecting signatures and then send it again, and also send it to members of Congress. So if your organization is interested in being part of our letter, our website, and I'll show you what our website looks like in a minute, we'd love to have you be part of that groundswell of effort. Energy Star is also slated for zero funding. Their budget is bigger. They have a $50 million annual budget. WaterSense is only $2 million. I mean, that's a rounding error for the feds, but it is slated for zero funding. So these are the issues that face us in water efficiency. So let's get at this whole issue of the conservation conundrum and the whole issue of how a utility can do conservation if it means they're going to lose revenue. This is a problem that we knew we needed to solve. We were seeing all kinds of press reports that looked just like this. Conservation driving up water rates. This is Louisville Journal-Courier. This is the Sunday edition. Environmental concerns challenge bottom line at Louisville Water Company. Makes you think that Louisville must have one hell of a conservation program if it's causing this big panic. Well, actually, Louisville doesn't have a conservation program. if you actually read the article and you get to column 8, you find out that they've lost 3 big industrial water users that have moved out of the service area. And so they've had to adjust the rates to deal with that. Yes, they've had the reduction in demand that I've been talking about, this 1% per year, but the general manager, in talking to the reporter, said, yeah, our consumers are using less, they're conserving. Voila, the headline. And it doesn't matter where you are, this is the headline. It doesn't matter what your reason is for your rate increase, this becomes the headline. And it's developed now a very bad reputation, and that's what we call the conservation conundrum. Yes, we know lower demand means lower revenue. If you don't change where you're collecting your revenue, you are always going to make less revenue from your water sales because of the lower demand. That's just obvious. But it doesn't have to be a punitive action in your utility. You just need to make sure that those reduced water sales are not impairing your ability to collect your fixed costs. You still have to do your debt service. You still have to, pay for the chemicals and the treatment of the water. You still have to be able to meet the fixed costs that are associated with the water delivery and the long-term expansion needs that you have with the revenue that you're collecting, but that's all part of what you need to assess on a regular basis. And so the unstable revenue problem that we're facing is becoming a serious issue, not only financially, but politically, because we're so unhappy about rate increases that we don't tend to make annual rate adjustments, and at least not in the public sector. The investor-owned utility community has options that the public sector utilities don't have. And so the public sector utilities like to just delay that painful rate increase as long as possible. I've talked to general managers who say, yeah, I know I need to review my rate structure, but I'm retiring next year and I'm going to leave it for the next guy. That's one common response. Another response is we try to space out our rate changes over every 4 or 5 years because it just takes us a year to do it, and it's really, really a painful process. And I understand that. I mean, I sat on as an elected water board representative, had to be a tie-breaking vote on a rate structure that was very, very high. And I didn't get reelected. I'm sure my vote had something to do with that. But that's the reality that we're facing. We hate doing these rate increases, so we tend not to until it becomes such a panic that we're in a double-digit rate increase scenario. And so conservation becomes the convenient thing that the general manager says. I'm sorry we have to do this to you, but you did such a good job conserving. We've now not collected enough revenue to meet our costs, so this is what this rate structure is attempting to provide. So it's a negative message, doesn't play well with the customers, but I understand why the customers are not understanding what's going on, because what they're seeing is this. They're seeing this blue line of the water and sewer rates just climbing upwards, whereas the consumer price index, which is the gray line, is much lower. Even energy, natural gas are not experiencing the wide fluctuations in pricing. This is a great chart that Jan Beecher at Michigan State University does. She's tracking this on a regular basis. And it's showing the water and sewer is suddenly becoming, the utility that is skyrocketing in terms of its rate increases. And it's having a negative effect in the press, and it's having a negative effect on bond ratings. So here's an article from the Texas Tribune. Texans answer call to save water, only to face higher water rates. And you get down to the fact that Fitch downgraded Fort Worth's water and sewer debt last year, downgraded the bond rating because they had consistently under-collected what they had projected in water sales. So Fitch considered them a bigger risk, bond rating downgraded, and it cost them $11 million in that additional revenue required for the bonded indebtedness. See in red, because of water conservation. Fort Worth does not have a water conservation program. Again, this becomes the convenient reason. And when we talked to Fitch and said, but isn't this really a lack of planning? Isn't that what you're identifying? Well, yeah, that's the reason. So the whole planning paradigm for how we collect our revenue is now in the process of changing, because now we really need to look at it on a much more periodic basis. Annually is better than every 5 or 6 years. And the consumer needs to be brought into this conversation, because the consumer doesn't understand. Most consumers will say, well, if your demand is going down, that means your costs are going down, which means my water should be cheaper. So why isn't my water bill going down? That's the first response that they have. And the second response is, I did what you asked, I conserved, so why am I paying more? And since they don't even understand how much water they use, it's all becoming very complicated. When I was on this water board, in California, you would expect California would be a lot more enlightened. The general manager came to me and said, why are you having all these people in the boardroom? I was chair at the time. You're inviting all these people to come in and talk. I don't want these people in the boardroom. I want to just be white noise in the background. I just want to deliver them the water. I want them to think that they're getting predictable, safe drinking water, and I don't want them to think about it. And that's been the utility philosophy for 50 years. And it works when times are good. But we're not in good times anymore. We're in lots of, times of, questions about water quality, questions about regulatory compliance, questions about revenue stability. And now we need to talk more to the customers and less. And so this is a paradigm that's fundamentally uncomfortable for most of the water engineers that I've worked with over my years, because it involves a lot of public process that utilities have not historically been comfortable with. But this is the change that has to happen. And especially if your demand is where your consumer consumption is all going to outdoor water use, they need to understand that that's where their water is going and how that water needs to be priced to help them to conserve. But from the utility perspective, we've grown to love the way these customer patterns have evolved. And if a customer is irrigating a lot, that's often where utility makes a lot of money. And if your rate structure is set up so that your fixed costs are in those high tail blocks that suddenly disappear when they do conservation, you're stuck. So that gets at the whole issue of better design of rate structures. Because in wet years, when your customers aren't irrigating, you're suddenly you've gotten addicted to this high water use that now is not bringing you the revenue. So it's not just a problem in dry years when you don't have the water to sell. It's a problem in wet years when you have lots of water to sell, but the customer isn't asking for it. All of this has to be part of your management problem in your conservation plan, because we don't want you as the water supplier to be panicked about not having enough revenue to cover your fixed costs. We want you to still be able to think of conservation as a long-term cost reducer, and so that involves a lot of attention being paid to how you're collecting your revenue. So what did we do here? We decided at the Alliance for Water Efficiency to go get some grant money to put together a big program that we call Financing Sustainable Water. And we have a whole website devoted to just financial tools for the water utilities on this subject. The website is just financingsustainablewater, all one word, .org. And on that website, you'll find a handbook written in layman's terms that you can give to board members as well as staffers. And it talks about what the steps are that you go through to design a rate structure that will promote water efficiency and revenue stability at the same time. Then we built a rate model where you can analyze rate options, and it will predict for you the probability that you will or will not collect your revenue requirement. Because what have we done over the years? We've taken average water years, we've extrapolated average water years, and extrapolated average water sales from those average water years. And when do we ever have an average water year anymore? Almost never. So what this model does is it takes your precipitation information and actually shows you the wild swings that this particular rate structure that you've designed might be doing for you, and whether you actually have the ability to collect the revenue requirement that you've projected. So finally, we've built something that helps you analyze this. Many rate consultants do this, but they don't do it with the probability analysis. So that's the piece we've added, and all of this is available free of charge to water utilities. Even those with rate consultants, they can use this model as well. So that's what we've built. We've built a website to house it all in, and then we've got lots of information about how to use this model, how to use the handbook. This is a screenshot from the model that shows you that you can compare your average and median bill impacts. It gives you a histogram as to where your consumption is affected in your customer blocks. And then it tells you whether the rate structure you've designed meets some affordability thresholds, or whether it's really going to impact your low-income customers. And the examples I give are, if you're deciding, well, I'm going to raise my fixed charge to 50% of my water bill because that way I'll have predictable revenue. Well, if you've got a lot of low-income customers, that's a really regressive way to collect revenue. They are paying a disproportionate share of system costs, with that high fixed charge. So this is the model gives you an assessment of how you're faring in that affordability assessment. But then also on that website, we've got examples of utilities that have actually documented the conservation benefit in their rates. So the first study that we did was with Westminster, Colorado. Westminster has been doing conservation since 1985. Stu Feinglass is still there, Denise. He's still in Westminster. So we've got a guy who has all these conservation records going back to 1985. And Westminster, like Seattle, had projected lots of infrastructure that was needed to supply new demand. They were growing quite extensively. They did not build that new infrastructure because they funded instead the conservation programs to keep the demand level. And so what Stu figured out was, if we had built those facilities, what would our rates look like now? And compared to what their rates are with conservation, the rates would have been double what they are now, had they not done the conservation program. So this is a case study that actually documents that value of conservation. It's a long-term value. We know that that doesn't help for short-term rate hearings, but it does provide that long-term perspective. We're about to publish a similar study for Tucson, Arizona, and for Gilbert, Arizona, and we'd love to do one here in the East. So this is our attempt to try and help utilities understand that long-term benefit of water conservation. But we know that they have a problem with communication with their customers, so we've also designed a video that, again, is freely downloadable, and utilities can post it on their websites, and it communicates not only the value of water, but what they're actually paying for as a consumer. I mean, they're paying for service, right? They're not paying for unit blocks of water, really. They're paying for the service. So when the customer comes to the hearing and says, water should be free, it falls from the sky free, why do I have to pay for it? I mean, an answer you can give them is, you can get the water for free. Come to our reservoir with your bucket and we'll let you fill it up. But if you want us to deliver it to your house, tons of water every day to your house, that's what you're paying for. So it's the service component about it, and what this video does in a 3-minute video is it goes through what those pieces of the service are and how the water bill increases as the water is withdrawn from the source, as it's treated, as it's pumped, as it gets to the household and is used there, as it's collected and then sent to wastewater treatment, and then discharge. All of those have costs associated, and so it shows it for the average water bill how those costs layer in. So that's a video that we make available free of charge for utilities to use, and they can also contact us and customize it and have their own utility name on it if they like. We also provide information on how to message on water rates so that you get away from that negativity associated with typical conservation messages. And you emphasize to the customer, yes, your bill is going to be going up, but your bill, because you conserve, will always go up less than someone who doesn't. And helping to explain, to the customer why they're needing to pay for, and what the value is of the water that they're paying for. Because it's still a bargain. I mean, all you have to do is travel to a country, and most countries don't have safe, affordable drinking water, to appreciate how affordable water is in this country. And we just don't have a perspective on it. We think it's an outrageously expensive service. We've done a great job in this country, and we just don't get credit for it. So we want to change the conversation about how conservation is perceived, how rates and how revenue is collected in a water utility, and we want the consumer to be a partner in the conservation program planning and in the messaging on paying for the rates. And one of the recommendations we make in the handbook is creating a community advisory committee on designing rates that involve members of the Chamber of Commerce, members of your community leaders, so that they are invested in the solution and help sell it within the community. It's the only way to move forward these days. So all of that's available on our website, financingsustainablewater.org. It's because we were grant funded to do it. It's freely available to water utilities everywhere. Oops. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover, and I'm almost done, I promise. This is the website, what it looks like, so you'll recognize it when you get there. The last thing I want to just talk about is state water efficiency and conservation policies, because I know you're in the process of putting together a water plan, state water plan. So you can benefit by taking a look at what's already been existing. So we did, in 2012, we did a scorecard report on water efficiency. There have been energy efficiency ones done for years, and they have created a competition, a fair competition between the states as to who gets every year a better energy policy score than other states. And what we wanted to do was create that same buzz with water efficiency. So our first version of the report, it just looked at what laws and regulations existed in every one of the 50 states to promote conservation and efficiency. And we worked together with the Environmental Law Institute, the lawyers there, and we assembled not only state information, but Canadian province information. That's online. It's not part of the U.S. State Scorecard report, but it's there. And so now we're in the process this year of updating it to 2017. It's 5 years later. We know states have made changes in their policies. We want to see what those changes are. So fundamentally what we did was we asked 20 standard questions, the same questions of every single state. And the questions and how we scored them was, we had an advisory committee of state agency folks in 6 state agencies who advised us on whether we were fairly ranking the weight of the answers to the questions. And it took us about a year. We began collecting data in the summer of 2012, and we finalized the report about a year later and posted a lot of the information online. And I know this may be hard to read, but here's an example of one of the states. This is California. California got a great score. There were only one of 2 states that got scores in the A category. This is an A-. But you can see the 20 questions. You can see where it says yes and no. And some of the questions are very simple. A question like, does your state require compliance with efficiency standards for plumbing products that are greater than the national standard? So right now we have 4 states in the United States, California, Colorado, Texas, and Georgia, who have passed state laws requiring compliance with the WaterSense level rather than just the federal Energy Policy Act level. And so a state that has done that gets great points. And I would submit to you that that could be something you could easily do here. You have a record of being a leader in that area. You won't have any industry opposition. In fact, you'll have the plumbing manufacturers coming in and embracing this. It's not going to cost the utilities any money, so you won't get any opposition from them. And it's a great way to get a whole nother layer of water efficiency to happen at minimal cost. And you'll also improve your score. So these are the kinds of questions we ask. Do you have a water loss regulation or policy? Do you have authority to approve or reject conservation plans filed by a utility? These are all the kinds of questions that we asked. And so we developed this grading scale together with our state agency contacts, and you know, you could get yes answer to 4 questions and still be kind of at a D stage. We tried to weight it so that most of the, like, you know, a bell curve, kind of weight it like a bell curve. But what did we end up with? Well, it's not exactly a bell curve. Only 2 states got anything close to an A. We have 11 states that are in the B category, 18 that are Cs, and 19 that are Ds. So we have a little bit of work we can do. There's, I think, lots of progress that we can make in this area. Here's what the results look like distributed across the country. So you'll see California and Texas being the states that had the most amount of laws and regulations on the books governing efficiency, or funding on the books for efficiency. That also counted for points. And then you'll see how the other states rated. I was chagrined to see that Connecticut got a worse score than Rhode Island, but I still think that's something we can work on. But we're definitely at a position in this round of getting the latest updates to help you with showing you what we are finding in other states, what they're adopting, and maybe some of that might be relevant for your state water plan discussions. So we're happy to share that information with you. I'll work with Lori on that. But that's information that we'd be happy to make available to you. Here's a list of who scored the best, what the highest states are. Interestingly, New Hampshire New Hampshire and Rhode Island are the 2 New England states that scored the highest. And the report's available on our website online if you want to take a look, dive a little deeper to see what some of those answers are. So, as I mentioned, we're in the process of revising it since 5 years have elapsed. We're expanding some of the questions and clarifying them. We're not giving points for things that don't seem to make sense anymore. We're changing the dynamic of it. And we're adding climate change and resiliency questions to the survey. And we got some funding from the Water Research Foundation to do that, in particular because we know that federal leadership on climate change is disappearing. So we know state leadership is going to be supplanted in its place, and we'd like to showcase examples of states that are doing a particularly good job of this. So that's a factor that's going to be added to the scorecard. Our draft will be available for public review probably in September or so, and I will be personally working with Lori on the revision. I'm obviously personally motivated to make sure Connecticut shows well. So we want to make sure that that's part of the discussion. So here's our website. As I said, we're in the process of revising it, but it's got all kinds of information on it. It's ready to use now. AllianceForWaterEfficiency.org is one way you can access it, or A4WE. There are many different ways to get there, but we have lots of information on our website. We also have a consumer website that we call Home Water Works, and again, it's a free water site. It's not something that you have to pay to belong to. It's got a water calculator that's very easy for the consumer to use. Great graphics. We work together with the Field Museum in Chicago and design what I consider is more like a treasure hunt. So it's not a dry spreadsheet you fill out. It's a fun little game, especially useful for our school education programs. All of those little circles with the Sherlock Holmes magnifying glass, you click on it and open it up. It opens you up into the room. Here's the bathroom, and then you click on the question marks and answer the questions that are being asked. And then compiled at the end of this fun little survey is what your water use is in various categories, what the average water use is in houses in your zip code, because this is all coded by zip code, and then what the WaterWise house uses in your zip code. So you can see where you compare with a more efficient home, and then you get a list of what you can do to improve your consumption and to be more water efficient. So this is all available on our Home Water Works website, and you access it just home-water-works.org. So I know I've talked probably longer than I should. Want to leave time for questions and discussion, because I know that might be probably more valuable than all my yakking has been so far. But thank you for the opportunity to come. I'm always happy to be here in Connecticut.
Thank you, first of all, for being here, and thank you for bringing her here. Years ago, if you remember, in Waterbury, I think you and I presented.
Oh, yeah.
Remember?
I do.
Water conservation. So thank you for everything. So I'm just sitting here. There's a number, and we're not a member yet because we haven't paid our bill. So.
But it's coming, I'm sure.
Well, money's not easy or simple these days, right? So. We're going to pay that and become a member. So
thank you.
It's important.
I appreciate that. And Deep was a member at one point when Commissioner Esty was there, and then it's kind of fell off the wagon.
Well, it's hard, and you think, well, $750 is not a lot of money, but it is when you have many other things. But this is important for us at the health department, and so one of the things that I was thinking about, you said you'd like to have something similar to Westminster Colorado happen here in Connecticut, and I'd like to talk to you further about how we can make that happen. I have some ideas. There's water utilities that are in the next 5 to 10 years that will struggle finding the next source of supply, and I think water conservation, water efficiency would be helpful to many utilities that are going to struggle for the next source. And funding for the next source. So also, as Jack mentioned, I like the idea of the thinking through a legislative initiative to match WaterSense and become the 5th state, because I think that just fundamentally makes a lot of sense.
And we can give you language and everything, because we've worked with the states that have done it, so we're happy to share that.
And Representative Mashinsky is there.
She'll help us.
Mary's already.
She's going to put it in this week.
She's drafting the language.
We'll have it passed by the end of the
She's
session.
already commenting on it, getting moving. So that's something we would love to work with you on. I'm certain that our department's very interested in that. And also, lastly, as you and I talked briefly as I walked in today, possibly bringing you back to work with utilities and put together a workshop.
Happy to do that.
I think that would be great. And my friend Dave from Portland, who we're meeting next week, right?
Yes.
I'm part of the Sustainability Committee, Connecticut section, AWWA.
We could have an ad hoc member.
Yeah.
Wow.
Former chair, right? Former
That's
chair.
a great idea.
Yeah.
So next week we can talk more about all of this and work together with the Connecticut section on hopefully bringing you back in the fall or the spring to talk to utilities about a number of things. And so we can work with the Connecticut section education committee as well as the sustainability committee. So thank you again.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I have no specific questions, but just some thoughts.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Mashinsky, you have any comments, parting thoughts? Okay, I want to, again, thank you for taking the time. An excellent presentation. We look forward to a continued relationship with you on the state and national level. So
Thank you.
very much.
Appreciate that.